Hello everyone. Today I want to talk to you about a subject that is often difficult to discuss, yet deeply important for anyone caring for a loved one at the end of life. Something we refer to as terminal agitation. Over the past 30 years as a physician in hospice and palliative care, I've been at the bedside of countless patients in their final days. I've witnessed moments of peace, but also moments of deep restlessness. When a person who seemed calm suddenly becomes agitated, confused, or physically unsettled, they might try to get out of bed, speak incoherently, or appear frightened and unreachable. It's distressing to watch, and even more heartbreaking for families who want nothing more than a peaceful farewell for someone they love. That's why in this video I'd like to walk you through what terminal agitation is, why it happens, and more importantly, what we can do to help. I'll also be showing you a few real-life examples with the full consent of the families involved, so that you can better understand how this can look and feel in practice. My hope is that what you learn here will offer both knowledge and comfort. This isn't just medical information, it's the wisdom passed down through many experiences, from patients and families who have allowed me the honor of being with them in life's final chapter. Terminal agitation is something I've encountered more times than I can count, yet it never becomes routine. It's a state of intense restlessness or agitation that can occur in the final days or hours of life. And although we've given it a clinical name, what it truly represents is a moment, sometimes brief, sometimes prolonged, when the body and mind no longer seem to be in harmony as a person transitions out of this life. It doesn't always look the same. I've seen patients who were otherwise calm suddenly begin to pace, walking back and forth across their living room, seemingly unaware of their surroundings or the people trying to speak to them. Others, who are already bedbound, may toss and turn, reach out with their hands as if searching for something, or try to get up despite having lost the strength to do so. I've sat beside individuals who began speaking incoherently, calling out or even shouting for help, their words fragmented, their eyes unfocused. There are times when they appear frightened or deeply confused, as if trapped somewhere between this world and the next. And in those moments, I often see the same look on the faces of family members: worry, helplessness, and a silent plea for understanding. What makes terminal agitation particularly difficult is its unpredictability. It doesn't happen to everyone, and when it does, it can come suddenly. There are patients who never exhibit a single sign of it, and others who struggle with it in the final days. And while there are possible explanations, medications, underlying pain, metabolic changes, there are also times when no clear cause is found. As a physician, that's one of the more humbling realities of end-of-life care. Sometimes, despite all our tools and knowledge, the body has its own way of letting go. In the next part of this discussion, I'll share some of the potential causes we explore as clinicians, from physical discomforts to chemical imbalances, and what we can do to help ease the experience. Because while we may not always be able to prevent terminal agitation, we can often find ways to relieve it, bringing a measure of peace to both the patient and their loved ones in those final sacred hours. One of the most challenging aspects of terminal agitation is the uncertainty surrounding its cause. Families will often look to me with understandable urgency, asking, "Why is this happening?" And the truth is, sometimes we just don't know. That's a difficult thing to say as a physician, not because it reflects a lack of effort or care, but because the human body, especially at the edge of life, doesn't always follow the rules we've come to expect. That said, there are patterns we look for. The first is pain. Uncontrolled pain can absolutely lead to restlessness, especially when the person can no longer express what they're feeling in words. It's why we're so diligent about regularly assessing pain, not just by what the patient says, but by how they move, how they breathe, how they respond to touch or sound. When someone is nonverbal, these signs become our language. Another common factor is the inability to relieve basic physical needs. I once had a patient who became increasingly agitated over a short period, and it wasn't until we realized he was unable to urinate that we found our answer. Once we placed a catheter, the change was almost immediate, a kind of visible release, not just physically, but emotionally. The same goes for constipation. especially when a patient is no longer eating or moving much. When someone can't empty their bowels, the discomfort may not show up as a complaint, but as agitation, thrashing, or moaning. These are things we've learned to check early, what some hospice nurses refer to as the 3 Ps: pain, pee, and poop. We also consider medications. Near the end of life, people are often prescribed multiple drugs for pain, for anxiety, for sleep. Occasionally, a new medication or the combination of several can have unintended effects. Even medications that served someone well for months can become problematic as their organs begin to shut down and their body can no longer metabolize them the same way. In these cases, adjusting or discontinuing a medication can bring significant relief. And then there are medical conditions themselves. For instance, patients with liver failure may develop high levels of ammonia in their blood, which can cause confusion and restlessness. Similarly, changes in kidney function, blood chemistry, or oxygen levels can all play a role. We try to investigate these possibilities where appropriate, though we are always balancing the pursuit of answers with the need to preserve comfort. At a certain point in the dying process, aggressive testing can create more burden than benefit. When we can identify a cause and treat it, it's one of the more gratifying moments in this work. But when no clear reason emerges, when we've addressed every possibility and the agitation still persists, that's when we begin to recognize it as a natural part of the dying process itself. And from there, we shift our focus fully to comfort, to presence, and to peace. I'll speak more on that next. When we begin to see signs of terminal agitation, the very first thing we do is investigate. As I mentioned earlier, we start with the basics: pain, urinary retention, constipation, the 3 Ps. These may seem simple, even mundane, but in my experience, they account for more distress than most people realize. I recall one gentleman, a soft-spoken man with advanced cancer, who became unusually irritable and restless over the course of a day. He wasn't verbal anymore, but his body was clearly trying to tell us something. It turned out he hadn't had a bowel movement in over a week. Within hours of administering a suppository, his breathing eased, his body relaxed, and the agitation dissolved. Sometimes it's truly that straightforward. If we listen closely enough, but there are times when, despite our best efforts, no obvious cause can be found. We've ruled out pain, checked for urinary blockage, addressed constipation, reviewed every medication, and still, the patient remains agitated, often in a way that feels untethered from reality. In those cases, we begin to accept that what we're seeing is terminal agitation in its purest form. Not something to fix, but something to manage. And management more often than not means medication. Now, this isn't about sedating someone for convenience, and I'm very clear about that with families. It's about comfort, not just for the patient, but for those at the bedside who are witnessing something they may not understand and certainly never hope to see. We use medications such as antipsychotics, sedatives, or even opioids, not to knock someone out, but to quiet the storm within. Sometimes a low dose suffices, other times we need more, enough to help the person rest, to bring them out of the cycle of agitation. It's never a decision we make lightly, and it always involves conversation with the family about goals and values. Of course, medications are just one part of the picture. The environment matters too, more than people often think. A bright room with a television blaring, several people talking at once, or the hum of medical equipment can all amplify a person's distress, even if they're no longer fully conscious. I've found that dimming the lights, turning off the screens, and simply speaking in a calm voice can shift the energy in a room profoundly. I once cared for a woman in her 80s who became terribly agitated in the middle of the night. Her family was distraught. I asked them to turn off the overhead light, leave only a small lamp glowing, and just sit quietly near her, speaking her name softly, holding her hand. She calmed down without a single medication. Sometimes, stillness is the strongest medicine. Timing, too, is critical. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned over the years is that early recognition makes all the difference. If we intervene when the first signs appear, perhaps a sudden change in sleep, a new restlessness, or an unexplained sense of urgency, We have a far better chance of bringing someone back to comfort than if we wait until things have escalated. Families who are present daily often sense this shift before we do, and I always encourage them to speak up, no matter how small the change may seem. Ultimately, what we aim for is dignity. Whether that means gently adjusting medications, turning down the volume in a room, or simply staying close during a restless night, everything we do is in service of helping someone leave this life with peace, surrounded by care and without fear. That's the heart of this work. In the final section, I'll share a few reflections on how families can support their loved one and themselves through this difficult yet sacred time. Over the years, I've come to believe that one of the most important roles a family can play during the final days of a loved one's life is not in doing, but in being. Being present, being steady, being a quiet anchor amid the emotional currents that often rise during this time. There's no instruction manual for how to sit at the bedside of someone you love as they prepare to leave this world, but I've seen again and again that presence, more than anything else, is what makes a difference. One of the stories that stays with me is that of a middle-aged daughter caring for her mother, who was in her final days after a long illness. The mother had begun to exhibit signs of terminal agitation. She was calling out, restless in bed, confused. The daughter, understandably frightened, asked me, "Should I talk to her? Should I stay quiet? I don't know what to do." I told her, "Talk if it feels right, be silent if that's what your heart says, but most of all, stay close. Let her know she's not alone." That night, the daughter sat beside her mother with the lights low and a soft piece of music playing in the background, an old piano piece her mother used to love. She didn't say much, just held her mother's hand, brushed her hair back gently, and from time to time whispered, "I'm here. You're safe." The mother eventually settled, her breathing slowed, the restlessness softened, and the next morning she passed quietly with her daughter still by her side. These moments don't require eloquent words or grand gestures. In fact, some of the most powerful expressions of love I've seen have been in silence. A husband gently wiping his wife's brow, a son sitting cross-legged on the floor beside his father's bed, just watching his chest rise and fall. In the face of terminal agitation, especially when it feels like nothing can be done, simply being there, with calm energy, with patience, with love, is often more healing than we imagine. It's also important to remember that this time is not only about the person who is dying, but also about those who remain. Families carry the memory of these final hours for the rest of their lives. That's why I always encourage caregivers to take care of themselves too, to rest, to ask for support, to breathe. You can't pour from an empty cup, especially when the moment asks so much of your heart. If you find yourself walking this road, if someone you love is nearing the end and showing signs of restlessness, I hope you'll remember that you're not alone, and that even in the midst of confusion, fear, or agitation, there is still space for peace. Peace doesn't always look like silence. Sometimes it looks like holding a trembling hand. Sometimes it sounds like a familiar voice cutting through the fog. Sometimes it's simply the courage to stay. And that, I believe, is love in its purest form. As we come to the end of today's video, I want to leave you with a few closing thoughts. Not as a physician giving a lecture, but as someone who has stood beside many bedsides, held many hands, and witnessed the final breath of more people than I can count. It never becomes easy. It never becomes ordinary. But through the years, I've come to recognize that even in the midst of pain, confusion, or restlessness, there is still beauty in the process of letting go, if we know how to meet it with care, understanding, and compassion. Terminal agitation can be one of the more difficult experiences a family will encounter in the final days. It shakes our sense of peace. It challenges the image we hope for, that gentle, quiet passing we've seen in movies or imagined in our minds. But the truth is, dying, like birth, is a process. It can be messy, unpredictable, and at times distressing. That does not mean it is wrong. That does not mean you failed in caring for your loved one. It means they are transitioning, and sometimes the body and the spirit struggle on that threshold. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's that you don't have to walk that part of the journey alone. There are things we can do medically, emotionally, spiritually to soften the edges. Whether it's managing symptoms with medication, adjusting the environment to bring calm, or simply holding space beside the person who is restless, each action matters. Each choice becomes a thread in the tapestry of their final days, a legacy not just of how they died, but how they were loved. I've seen families transformed by the process of caring for someone in their last hours. I've seen them become gentler, more present, more accepting not just of death, but of life itself. I've seen moments of laughter amid the tears, stories shared over a hospital bed, and quiet reconciliations that would not have happened in any other setting. It is a sacred time, and if we allow it, it can teach us more than we ever expected. So whether you are a caregiver, a family member, or simply someone who wants to understand this journey better, thank you for being here. Thank you for your willingness to learn, to feel, and to prepare. Because in doing so, you're not only honoring the people you love, you're helping to bring dignity and humanity to one of life's most vulnerable chapters. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.